Education begins where understanding replaces confusion. Many struggles in life are not caused by lack of effort, intelligence, or discipline, but by the loss of one essential word from a person's thinking. That word is faith. Faith is not emotional optimism, blind belief, or passive waiting. Faith is informed trust, trust grounded in knowledge, truth, and alignment with divine principles. When faith is removed, life becomes reaction-based. Decisions are made under pressure rather than purpose. Fear replaces clarity, and circumstances begin to dictate identity. This is why the removal of faith is so destructive. Without it, individuals rely solely on visible evidence, temporary conditions, and personal strength. Education teaches us that systems collapse when their foundation is removed. Faith functions as that foundation for the human spirit. Faith does not deny reality, it interprets reality correctly, understands that present conditions are not final conclusions. Without faith, people attempt to control outcomes through anxiety, overthinking, and constant striving. Creates mental fatigue and spiritual instability. With faith, responsibility is reordered. A person still acts, plans, works, but no longer carries the burden of being the ultimate source of outcomes. Letting God handle it does not mean abandoning effort or intelligence. It means recognizing authority and order. In any structured system, effectiveness depends on knowing who is responsible for what. Education thrives when roles are clear. Spiritual life, confusion arises when humans attempt to assume divine responsibility. This produces stress, fear of failure, and emotional exhaustion. When God is trusted to handle what only God can handle, timing, provision, protection, and outcome, the mind becomes disciplined rather than distressed. Faith teaches patience without passivity and action without panic. It allows learning to occur because the mind is no longer dominated by fear. Research in human behavior confirms that clarity reduces anxiety, and faith provides that clarity at a spiritual level. One of the most significant outcomes of letting God handle it is peace. Peace is not the absence of challenges, it is the presence of order. When faith is active, peace becomes a stabilizing force that improves decision-making, relationships, and long-term vision. A peaceful mind learns faster, adapts better, and leads more effectively. Another outcome is consistency. Fear creates inconsistency because it changes with circumstances. Faith creates steadiness because it is rooted in truth rather than emotion. Educational growth requires consistency, daily discipline, long-term thinking, and resilience. Faith supplies these qualities internally, not through pressure but through confidence. Finally, letting God handle it restores identity. People often define themselves by success, failure, or approval. Faith redefines identity as purpose-driven rather than performance-driven. This produces ethical strength, humility, and courage. A person who trusts God is not easily manipulated by fear, urgency, or intimidation. In conclusion, the erasure of faith leads to confusion, exhaustion, and instability. The restoration of faith leads to clarity, peace, and effective living. Letting God handle it is not weakness. It is educated trust. It is the highest form of wisdom, where knowledge, responsibility, and belief work together to produce a life governed by purpose rather than pressure. Faith functions as the stabilizing center of human life, shaping how individuals interpret reality, respond to pressure, and make decisions under uncertainty. When faith is properly understood, not emotional optimism or wishful thinking, but a disciplined confidence rooted in truth, trains the mind to see beyond immediate conditions and to evaluate situations from a higher, more accurate perspective. This mental posture produces stability because it prevents external events from dominating internal order. A person grounded in faith is not easily shaken by change, delay, or opposition, because their confidence is anchored in something unchanging rather than temporary outcomes. The absence of faith creates instability at the cognitive level. When faith is removed, the mind defaults to fear-based reasoning. Fear magnifies risk, exaggerates obstacles, and narrows perception. Instead of evaluating facts calmly, individuals begin to react impulsively, driven by urgency and self-preservation. This reactionary mindset weakens judgment and leads to inconsistency. Educational psychology shows that learning and problem-solving decline under high stress. Faith counteracts this by restoring mental clarity, allowing reason and wisdom to function without emotional interference. Faith also establishes identity stability. Without it, people define themselves by performance, approval, circumstance. Success inflates identity, failure diminishes it, and external validation becomes the primary measure of worth. This produces emotional volatility and internal conflict. Faith recenters identity on purpose rather than outcome. When a person understands that their value is not determined by results alone, they gain freedom to learn, adapt, and improve without fear of condemnation. This stability is essential for growth because development requires the willingness to face mistakes without losing confidence. At a behavioral level, faith regulates action, does not remove effort, it directs effort. Individuals without faith often overwork in an attempt to control outcomes, leading to exhaustion and burnout. Others may underperform due to discouragement and uncertainty. Faith creates balanced productivity. It teaches disciplined action combined with patience, allowing individuals to work consistently without being driven by panic. This balance improves long-term effectiveness because energy is sustained rather than depleted. Faith also influences how time is perceived. Instability arises when people demand immediate results and interpret delay as failure. Faith reframes time as a process rather than a threat. It understands that growth, learning, and meaningful outcomes require development. This perspective reduces frustration and prevents premature decisions driven by impatience. In educational terms, mastery is never instant. It is progressive. Faith aligns the mind with this reality, producing endurance and focus. Social stability is another outcome of faith as a core principle. Individuals who lack inner stability often transfer their insecurity into relationships through control, comparison, or withdrawal. Faith produces emotional security, allowing people to relate with empathy rather than defensiveness. Stable individuals listen better, respond thoughtfully, and lead responsibly. In group settings, stability creates trust, which is essential for collaboration and shared learning. Faith further stabilizes moral reasoning. Without a fixed internal standard, ethics become situational and easily compromised under pressure. Faith establishes an internal compass that guides choices even when they are inconvenient. This moral consistency strengthens character and builds credibility. Educational development is not limited to knowledge acquisition. It includes character formation. Faith supports this by aligning behavior with principle rather than impulse. Mental resilience is one of the most measurable benefits of faith. When challenges arise, faith prevents despair by separating circumstance from conclusion. It teaches the mind that difficulty is not defeat and delay is not denial. This mindset increases perseverance and adaptability. Resilient individuals recover faster from setbacks and remain engaged in growth. Faith provides this resilience by sustaining hope through understanding rather than emotion. Finally, faith integrates all aspects of human functioning, thought, emotion, action, and purpose, into a coherent system. Instability occurs when these elements operate independently or in conflict. Faith aligns them toward a unified direction, producing internal harmony. This harmony is not the absence of struggle, but the presence of order. As a result, faith becomes the core stabilizer of human life, enabling individuals to grow intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually with consistency and confidence. The transfer of burden through trust begins with understanding responsibility. Many internal pressures arise not from external demands, but from assuming responsibility for outcomes that exceed human control. When individuals attempt to manage timing, results, and future certainty, mental strain increases. Trust introduces order by clearly separating human responsibility, effort, integrity, learning, and obedience to principle from divine responsibility, Outcomes, provision, direction, and protection. This separation does not reduce accountability, it refines it. Once roles are defined, the mind is freed from unnecessary weight. Psychologically, carrying excessive responsibility leads to chronic anxiety. The brain remains in a constant state of alert, anticipating threats and failures that may never occur. Trust interrupts this cycle. By transferring the burden of outcome to God, the nervous system stabilizes, allowing rational thought to dominate over emotional reactivity. Calmness enhances decision-making because choices are made based on wisdom rather than fear. Education thrives in environments where pressure is managed, not multiplied. Trust provides that management internally. Trust also reshapes motivation. Without it, people are often driven by fear of loss, fear of judgment, or fear of failure. These motivations produce short-term effort but long-term exhaustion. When trust is present, motivation shifts toward purpose and obedience to principle. Actions are taken because they are right, not because they guarantee immediate success. This creates sustainable discipline. Individuals continue to act faithfully even when results are delayed, because their confidence is anchored in alignment rather than reward. The transfer of burden through trust improves emotional regulation. Emotional instability often arises when people feel personally threatened by uncertainty. Trust provides emotional distance from outcomes without creating detachment from responsibility. A person can care deeply while remaining calm. This emotional balance prevents overreaction and regret-driven decisions. In professional and educational settings, emotional regulation is a key indicator of maturity and leadership. Trust supports this maturity by anchoring emotions to truth instead of circumstance. Trust also influences how failure is interpreted. When individuals believe they alone are responsible for outcomes, failure becomes personal condemnation. This leads to shame, withdrawal, or defensiveness. Trust reframes failure as feedback rather than final judgment. Since outcomes are not solely self-generated, setbacks become opportunities for learning rather than evidence of worthlessness. This mindset encourages persistence and continuous improvement, both essential for long-term success. At the cognitive level, trust expands perspective. Anxiety narrows focus to immediate threats, while trust broadens vision to long-term purpose. This shift allows strategic thinking instead of survival thinking. Individuals who trust are more willing to wait, plan, invest in future outcomes. They resist impulsive shortcuts because they believe timing and provision are governed by higher order. Patience enhances quality and reduces costly errors. Trust also transforms how effort is experienced. Without trust, effort feels heavy and draining because it is fueled by pressure. With trust, effort becomes purposeful and energized. The same task, when done in trust, produces less fatigue because the mind is not simultaneously battling fear. This principle explains why some individuals remain productive under high demand while others burn out under lesser loads. The difference is not capacity, but where the burden is placed. Relational dynamics are deeply affected by the transfer of burden. People who trust are less controlling and less defensive. They do not manipulate outcomes through people, because they do not view others as sources of security. This produces healthier communication and cooperation. Trust enables respect for boundaries and roles, reducing conflict and misunderstanding. In educational and organizational systems, this relational stability increases efficiency and morale. Trust also reinforces ethical consistency. When outcomes are surrendered to God, individuals are less tempted to compromise principles for immediate advantage. Fear often drives unethical behavior in the attempt to secure results. Trust removes this pressure by affirming that integrity is more valuable than control. This alignment strengthens character and builds long-term credibility. Ultimately, the transfer of burden through trust restores inner freedom. Freedom does not mean absence of responsibility, it means absence of oppression. Trust allows individuals to work diligently without being enslaved to outcomes. It produces a state where action is disciplined, emotion is stable. The future is faced with confidence rather than fear. In this state, growth becomes sustainable, learning becomes enjoyable, and life operates under order instead of anxiety. Trust produces measurable educational outcomes because it restructures how the mind processes pressure, responsibility, and growth. When life is God-governed rather than fear-governed, the first noticeable result is peace, not as an emotion but as a mental condition. Peace functions as cognitive order, quiets internal noise, reduces mental overload, and allows the brain to process information efficiently. In learning environments, whether formal or informal, peace enhances comprehension and retention. A calm mind observes more accurately, listens more deeply, and responds more wisely. Without peace, high intelligence becomes ineffective because anxiety disrupts focus and judgment. This peace directly contributes to clarity. Clarity is the ability to distinguish between what matters and what distracts. When trust in God governs life, the mind no longer treats every challenge as an emergency. Problems are evaluated rather than exaggerated. Educational growth depends on clarity because confusion slows progress. Trust simplifies decision-making by aligning thoughts with purpose instead of pressure. A clear mind sets priorities, manages time effectively, and avoids unnecessary complexity. This clarity strengthens learning habits and improves long-term planning. Another educational result is consistency. Consistency is essential for mastery. It is difficult to sustain without trust. Fear-driven individuals fluctuate in effort based on emotion, mood, or circumstance. They perform well when conditions are favorable and withdraw when challenged. Trust produces steady engagement. When outcomes are placed in God's hands, effort becomes disciplined rather than emotional. Daily study, practice, and self-improvement continue regardless of immediate results. This consistency compounds over time, leading to deeper understanding and skill development. Trust also enhances resilience, which is a critical learning competency. Resilience is the capacity to absorb failure without collapse. In a God-governed life, setbacks are interpreted as instruction rather than judgment. This perspective transforms failure into feedback. Educational psychology confirms that resilient learners progress faster because they remain engaged after mistakes. Trust prevents discouragement from becoming identity. Instead of saying, "I am defeated," the mind learns to say, "I am developing." This shift sustains motivation and long-term growth. A further outcome is ethical stability. Trust in God produces internal accountability rather than external compliance. Decisions are guided by principle instead of convenience. This moral clarity improves academic integrity, professional conduct, and leadership effectiveness. When values are stable, learning becomes purposeful rather than exploitative. Knowledge is pursued for contribution, not manipulation. Ethical learners apply understanding responsibly, which enhances credibility and influence over time. Trust also improves emotional regulation. Education is not only intellectual, it is emotional. Frustration, comparison, impatience, and fear often interrupt learning. Trust reduces emotional extremes by grounding the individual in assurance rather than uncertainty. Emotional regulation allows learners to persist through difficulty without becoming overwhelmed. This balance improves problem-solving, collaboration, and adaptability. Emotionally regulated individuals remain teachable, open to correction, and willing to grow. Another measurable outcome is focus. When the mind is not burdened with control over outcomes, attention is freed for the present task. Trust eliminates mental multitasking caused by worry. Focused attention increases efficiency and depth of understanding. In practical terms, fewer hours are wasted on distraction, and more progress is made with less exhaustion. Focused learning leads to expertise rather than surface-level knowledge. Trust further enhances leadership development. Individuals who trust God lead without domination or insecurity. They listen, delegate, and guide with confidence rather than control. Educational leadership requires emotional intelligence, patience, and vision. Trust supports these qualities by removing the fear of failure or loss of status. Leaders formed through trust create environments where others can learn, grow, and contribute effectively. Finally, trust produces long-term vision. Short-term thinking limits educational growth. Trust expands perspective beyond immediate reward or recognition. It teaches the value of preparation, process, and purpose. Learners with long-term vision invest in foundational knowledge, character development, and skill refinement. This vision sustains effort through seasons of slow progress. Trust anchors the future in divine order rather than uncertainty. In sum, God-governed living produces educational results that are observable and practical. Peace that enhances cognition, clarity that sharpens judgment, consistency that builds mastery, resilience that accelerates growth, ethics that stabilize character, emotional regulation that sustains learning, focus that deepens understanding, leadership that empowers others, and vision that secures the future. These outcomes demonstrate that trust is not abstract belief, but a functional system that improves the quality and effectiveness of human development.